Good morning and welcome to Florida Friendly Landscaping. Let's dig deep. Today we're going to talk about principle number 3 of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Principles, fertilize appropriately. My name is Jennifer Pelham and I'm the County Extension Director and Urban Horticulture Agent here at the University of Florida IFAS Extension in Martin County. So just a review, as we have done in previous sessions, just an overview of Florida Friendly Landscaping. It's an integrated approach to maintaining an attractive, colorful, and diverse yard. And the purpose of this program is to educate Floridians about science-based, environmentally friendly landscape practices, and to encourage Floridians to conserve and protect water resources. These are the 9 principles. 2 weeks ago, we covered right plant, right place. Last week, we talked about water efficiently. And today we're going to talk about fertilize appropriately. And if you missed any of the previous presentations, you can send me an email and I will send you out the recording so you can view them. Next week, we're going to talk about mulch and Florida Friendly Landscape Principle number 5, attract wildlife. So this is the agenda for that goes through March, same time, same place, if you want to join us for additional sessions. If you have joined us in some of the previous sessions, you would have received a reference sheet from me via email the afternoon after the presentation. And on that reference sheet included a link to this book. This is the Florida Yards and Neighborhood Handbook, which is part of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. This is the homeowner portion in the homeowner book. And it's available free online, or you're welcome to stop in our office here in Martin County and pick up your free copy. After today's session, I will also be sending out the link to this book. It does cover all 9 principles that we speak about during this webinar series. So let's talk about fertilizer. Fertilizer is an important part of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. We want to make sure that we fertilize appropriately and fertilize when needed. And what is fertilizer? Fertilizer is any substance that contains one or more of the recognized plant nutrients, which we'll discuss. Fertilizer promotes plant growth. It controls the soil acidity or alkalinity, which is the pH of the soil. And it also provides soil enrichment. So just overall gives the soil better life for the plants. And why do we fertilize plants? Well, we want to make sure that we have a reason to fertilize. We don't just want to fertilize because the calendar says to fertilize. We want to fertilize because maybe we want to increase the growth of our plants, especially if these are newly planted plants. We want to put some fertilizer out maybe a few months after we plant them to give them that good push to push out some new stems and some new leaves. We might fertilize to promote flowering or fruiting. A good fertilizer program is important to our vegetable and our fruit crops and our fruit trees. We may have to fertilize to correct nutrient deficiencies. Unfortunately, here in Florida, we have very sandy soils. Sandy soils do not hold nutrients very well. And because they don't hold nutrients very well, a lot of our plants will have nutrient deficiencies. And we're going to talk about how to recognize those during this presentation. When we talk about fertilizing our plants, we want to make sure that we have a good nutrient management plan before we just go ahead and start fertilizing. We want to make sure that we know the needs of our plants. What do they need to survive? Do they need a lot of fertilizer? Do they not need much fertilizer? We want to make sure that we understand the fertilizer label. So when you go to the garden center, you want to make sure you understand what you're buying. We want to know how and when to use the fertilizer, and we also want to know how to properly use fertilizer in order to reduce our nutrient leaching and runoff. Leaching is when the fertilizer and other pollutants leach down into the soil, into the aquifer, and runoff is when the fertilizer is taken by either irrigation or rainwater and runs off the property into the storm drains and pollutes our water resources that way. So we want to try to minimize that. And by fertilizing appropriately, we can minimize leaching and runoff. These are the 17 essential nutrients that plants need. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are all the nutrients that they get from the air and from water. So we don't have to supply these to the plants. Then there are the macro and micronutrients, and these are typically supplied by the soil. But like I said earlier, the sandy soils here in Florida do not hold a lot of these nutrients, so we may have to apply more of these nutrients to our soil for the plants. The macronutrients, macro meaning that the plants need these nutrients in larger quantities than the micronutrients. It's not that the macronutrients are any more important, they just are used in larger quantities than the micronutrients from the plants. And the macronutrients include nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are in red because those are the ones that you will see on a fertilizer bag with those numbers. Those numbers on a fertilizer bag represent these particular nutrients, and we're going to talk more about that. And then the micronutrients are iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, molybdenum, chlorine, and nickel. And these micronutrients are used by the plants in smaller quantities, but are still very important to the plant. And some fertilizers will contain micronutrients in their analysis, in their formula, and some may not. So we're going to talk about some of the macronutrients that the plants may need. And the first is nitrogen. So when we look at a fertilizer bag, that first number represents nitrogen. Nitrogen is essential to plant life, and it's what makes the plants green. You probably notice after you fertilize your lawn, the next day your grass is greener just from that one dose of fertilizer, because that's what nitrogen does. It makes the plants green. We also can get nitrogen from the air. You may notice after we have a lightning storm, lightning provides nitrogen to our plants. And also rainwater. So after we have a rain and lightning, you might notice that your lawn and your plants are greener than they were the day before. Nitrogen can also regulate the plant growth and development. Sometimes too much nitrogen will make the plants grow too fast. And if they grow too fast, that can lead to a lot of insects and disease attacking the plants. And nitrogen is found in the plant proteins and enzymes. And like I said, it naturally comes from the air and water and also decaying material. So if you use mulch in your landscape, all that mulch, as it starts to break down, it's going to add nitrogen to your plants naturally. However, we really need to be careful with applying nitrogen to our landscapes because it can become a pollutant in our waterways when we do not apply it properly. The next nutrient that we're going to talk about is phosphorus. Phosphorus is plentiful in our Florida soils. We have a lot of it naturally occurring. So we should not have to apply any phosphorus to our plants and to our turf grass unless we do a soil test that shows that our soil is deficient in phosphorus. Phosphorus is that middle number on the fertilizer bag. So you want that to be 0 or below 5. And that's important because it is a pollutant in our Florida waters also. So we don't want to over apply phosphorus when we already naturally have it in our soils. And the turf grass does not need much phosphorus either. So that can be very low. The third number on the fertilizer bag is potassium. Potassium is like a multivitamin for plants. It improves the drought tolerance of the plants. It improves the cold tolerance of the plants, and it also improves their disease resistance. And these photos above are showing palm trees that are phosphorus deficient. You can see that one palm tree shows kind of a yellow mottling color to it, where the other one shows some brown dead streaks in the leaflets. So phosphorus can show up as a deficiency differently in different plants, and that's something to take note of. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Now, sometimes on the fertilizer bag, you might have a fourth number. You might have like a 10, 5, 10, and then there's a 4. So what is that fourth number? And that fourth number is magnesium. So magnesium is also a macronutrient, and it activates plant enzymes for growth. So it just helps the plant growth overall. And unfortunately, magnesium is a common deficiency that we find in our plants here in Florida. We don't have much magnesium in the soil, so it does need to be applied to our plants. And one very, very common magnesium deficiency that we see all over Florida is the magnesium deficiency in the Canary Island date palms. So this is a Canary Island date palm that you see here in this photo. And those yellow leaves are on the bottom are magnesium deficiency. And a lot of times landscapers will go in and they'll cut off those yellow leaves. Well, by cutting off the yellow leaves doesn't solve the deficiency of magnesium. The magnesium deficiency will just go up to the next leaves. So, the only way to solve the magnesium deficiency is to apply magnesium to the soils for the plant to take up. So I know this chart is very, very small to see, and I'm going to send you a copy of this in the notes after the presentation today. But this just shows you how we can diagnose nutrient deficiencies in plants. The older leaves of the plants, which typically are the lower leaves, right? The lower leaves of the plants will, if they are deficient or start to turn yellow or purple or a different color, that means that they are deficient in a macronutrient. So it could be nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or magnesium. Just like we saw with the Canary Island date palm, the older leaves turned yellow. That is a sign that the plant is deficient in a macronutrient, which happened to be magnesium for that particular plant. Then if the newer leaves show a deficiency, then it's a micronutrient deficiency. It might be manganese or iron or zinc. So that's just one way to tell the difference wherever you're seeing the deficiency in the plants, what nutrient, you can at least narrow it down what nutrient it could be. And there's also an online nutrient key, which I'm going to send you that link also in the notes. You can go through that key and diagnose what nutrient your plant might be deficient in. So here's some common deficiency symptoms you might see in Florida. Nitrogen shows, you can see on that photo, the older leaves turn yellow and the entire leaf turns a pale yellow. That's a sign of nitrogen deficiency on the lower leaves. In the middle photo there, we have a potassium deficiency on palm trees. Potassium can look different in different plants. On this particular palm tree, it shows yellowing, and then the tips of the leaflets become brown or necrotic. And that's going to be on the older leaves also. Then magnesium is a macronutrient, like we said, and that's an older leaf deficiency. And what's unique about magnesium, if you look closely at the leaf there, you see kind of a V shape where it towards the end of the plant. And that V shape is a sign of magnesium deficiency. And if we looked closely at that Canary Island date palm, we would also see that V shape yellowing on those plants also. Manganese, that's a micronutrient. So you would see deficiency in manganese on the newer growth, like you see here on this plant. And then iron is also a micronutrient, and you'll see that also on the new leaf. So this is just showing you some of the symptoms that show up in plants when we have nutrient deficiencies. And you really want to make sure that you know your plants, know what your plants look like, and know what their needs are. So some plants are prone to specific deficiencies. Just like I said, the magnesium deficiency on palms is very specific to the palm trees. Also, we do notice potassium deficiency on palm trees here in Florida too. So we want to make sure when we apply a fertilizer to correct a deficiency, we don't need to apply a complete fertilizer that has the nitrogen and the phosphorus and the potassium and all the other nutrients in it. We just really need to apply the nutrient that is missing, that is lacking. So for example, you have this palm tree here that's deficient in magnesium. We can just apply magnesium sulfate around the canopy of that palm tree to remedy that problem, that magnesium deficiency. We don't need to go out and fertilize with a lawn fertilizer. We just need to use that magnesium sulfate. And then also know what your plants are supposed to look like. You see that photo below of the variegated plant, the copper plant, and that's supposed to look that way. So it's supposed to be variegated. So just know what the normal foliage looks like on your plant, so you know when there are issues of your plants, when they do have deficiencies. So let's talk about starting a nutrient management plan. And the first step is to start with a soil test. The soil test is going to tell you the pH of the soil, which the pH says if it's acid or alkaline. If you think about a pH scale, 7 is neutral. Anything lower than 7 is acidic, and anything higher than 7 is alkaline. And then also certain soil tests can tell you what the nutrient content of the soil is. So you can see where your soil is deficient, and that helps you apply the proper fertilizer for the plants. So you're not over applying one certain nutrient that might already be plentiful in the soil. So how do you get your soil test, or how do you take a soil test? So here's a little map of a house, and we want to choose certain areas. So your areas might be the front yard, and then another area might be the backyard, and then another area might be the vegetable garden or the flower garden or the naturals area off to the side. So these are different parts of the landscape that you want to test. You don't want to test all the soil at once, especially if you're digging up the soil, it looks different in color or texture, then you definitely want to do more than one test because it's probably going to have different results. So we want to sample the good and the bad areas separately. And you kind of go around in the area. You can see in the front of the house, there's that zigzag. Well, at each point, take a sample of soil. Walk a little bit in a zigzag, take another sample, and you're putting this all in a bucket. And then you mix that up and take a sample of the samples to get analyzed of the front yard. So then you get a good representation of one area. But like I said earlier, if you're digging and you notice one area the soil looks completely different than the previous areas, you might want to do a separate test for that area. And then you want to go ahead and do maybe a backyard test, or maybe you only want to test the bad areas that you have. And make sure you dig deep. Don't get the surface soil. Get the soil where the roots are, which are down at least 2, 4, 6 inches deep. And then once you mix those cores together and you get a good sample, you can send it either to us for a soil sample or up to the University of Florida for a soil sample. Here in Martin County, we can only test for the pH and salinity. Which means how much salt is in your soil. That's the only capability of equipment that we have here. And we do it free of charge at the moment. So you can drop off about a cup or cup and a half of soil for each test. So if you're doing the front yard and backyard, you'd have 2 bags of soil that you would drop off. And we do our tests on Tuesdays. So you can drop them off anytime and just know that you'll get the results back on a Tuesday. If you want to have a nutrient test, you can send your soil up to the University of Florida to our laboratory, the Soils Lab in Gainesville. And for just $10, which I think is pretty reasonable, they'll do a nutrient test for you. They'll test for the potassium, the phosphorus, the magnesium, calcium. They'll also do a pH test. And what's great about their tests, you let them know what you're trying to grow. Are you trying to grow turf grass? Are you trying to grow trees and shrubs? Are you trying to grow fruit trees? You tell them what you're trying to grow, and then they're going to give you back a fertilizer recommendation of how you should fertilize according to your soil test. And not only will they send you back the results, they'll also send me back the results. So if you don't understand something that's in the analysis, you can give me a call and we can talk through your soil sample. But you send that up to the soil lab up in Gainesville yourself. And but if you have questions filling out this form, let me know. And the link to the form will be in the notes that I send you out later this afternoon. So here's the pH scale. Most Florida soil pHs are slightly acidic. But here in Martin County, I've noticed a lot of our soils, the majority of our soils are actually higher pH soils. We're more alkaline, we're above 7, which doesn't pair well for growing too many plants. Most plants like to grow in a slightly acidic soil between 5.8 and 6.8. In our soils that we see coming back through our lab here is above 7. So that might be tricky on planting some particular types of plants that prefer an acidic soil, such as gardenias. They like more of an acidic soil. and Ixora is like more of an acidic soil. So knowing what your soil pH is going to help you with plant selection also. So it's important to know, because if you plant a plant in the wrong soil pH, it's going to have problems, and typically it's going to have nutrient problems. For example, you can see here, if we had a pH that came back a little bit above 7, between 7 and 7.5, you can see that the nutrients become unavailable to the plants in a high pH. Now, this is the chemistry of the soil. You could have a lot of, let's say, iron in the soil. You could have a lot of iron in the soil, but if the pH is too high, it locks the iron up in the soil, so it can't be absorbed by the plants. No matter how much iron is in the soil, it can't be absorbed by the plants with a high pH. So that's why we see a lot of iron and manganese deficiencies here in Martin County, because of our higher soil pHs. So you would have to lower the soil pH in order for the plant that may have that deficiency to be able to take in those nutrients. Or you plant a plant that's not prone to having iron and manganese deficiencies, which is planting the right plant for the right place. And you can see it goes on the other end too. If our soils came back too acidic, we could have a lot of deficiencies in potassium and sulfur and calcium and magnesium. So those are one reason why you could see deficiencies in your plants. It could be because of the soil pH, or it could be because that we just don't have that nutrient in the soil at all. So here's some pictures. You've seen some of these pictures before. So are these unadaptable plants? Are they the right plant for the right place, or is the soil just lacking a nutrient? And our soil test will be able to determine if it's a pH issue or a nutrient issue. So just as a review, we saw that the rose bush on the left is deficient in iron. We have a sago palm on the bottom left, and that is a manganese deficiency. It's called frizzle top because it makes the top fronds look very frizzled. There's a potassium deficiency on the palm frond on the top right, and then the magnesium deficiency on the bottom right. So it could be because of pH soils, or it could be because lack of nutrient. So let's go ahead and talk about fertilizers. If you've ever walked through the fertilizer aisle at the home and garden section of the stores, you can be overwhelmed very easily. There's so many choices out there, and hopefully this presentation will help you select the right fertilizer for the right plants and for the right situation in your landscape or in your gardens. So this is a typical fertilizer bag. Like I mentioned earlier, those numbers actually represent some nutrients. The first number represents nitrogen, the second number represents phosphorus, and the third number represents potassium. And they are the percentage by weight of the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in the bag. So for example, you see on this bag, you have a 16. 16% of the weight of that bag is nitrogen, 4% is phosphorus, and 8% is potassium. So if you add that up, the quick math here, that's, let's see, 30, 28, I'm sorry, I can't do math quick. That's 28. 28% of that bag is filled of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Well, what's the other percentage or weight of that bag? Well, it could be some micronutrients that are mixed in there. We'd have to read the small print to see what micronutrients are in there. You may have some magnesium in there, but a lot of times it's just filler that helps you distribute the fertilizer better, that helps the fertilizer get to the plants better, or it could be coatings on the fertilizer for slow release. So there's a lot of additives to the fertilizer bag. So you can just know that the higher the number, the stronger the fertilizer, the lower the number, the weaker the fertilizer. So you might need to use more of a weaker fertilizer or lower numbers than you would of a higher numbered fertilizer. The ratio is the relationship between those those numbers. So for example, here with the 1648, if we wanted to break that down into a ratio, it'd be 4 parts nitrogen to 1 part phosphorus to 2 parts potassium. So 4-1-2. And this is considered a complete fertilizer because it contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. If we had that middle number of phosphorus a 0, this would be an incomplete fertilizer because it does not contain any phosphorus, which, as you know, in Florida soils, that is a good thing. We don't want to be applying any extra phosphorus to the soil. So it's okay to buy something with a 0 in the middle there. I know a lot of people don't want to buy nothing, but it's actually good for the environment to buy nothing as far as phosphorus goes. So this is the fertilizer label. And the most important thing that I want to point out here is it's important to understand where your nitrogen source comes from. Because we talked about the 2 pollutants that we have in our Florida waters, and that is phosphorus, but also it's nitrogen. And we want to use slow release nitrogens in our landscapes when appropriate. And how do we know if it's slow release nitrogen? We have to read that label. We have to look where it says derived from. So it's going to tell you where the nitrogen comes from, and it's usually going to say from a slow release source. So let's go on and look at some examples. Well, first, let me finish defining fertilizers, then we'll look at some examples. Some of our fertilizers can be inorganic or synthetic. These are our mined or man-made fertilizers. They come from non-living or inorganic materials, ammonium nitrate, ammonium phosphate, potassium chloride. These are all considered inorganic nitrogen sources. Then we have our organic or natural fertilizers. These are derived from remains of byproducts of living organisms. So either they came from something that's alive or they were once alive themselves. Fish meal, bone meal, manure, and compost are all considered organic fertilizers. Within those organic fertilizers and organic and non-organic nitrogen sources, we have water-soluble and slow-release fertilizers. It's really important that we understand these terms when we go to select our fertilizers. Water-soluble fertilizers means that the fertilizer is available to the plants immediately, and it usually only lasts about 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, it's either completely taken up by the plant or it is leached or has run off the landscape. These are the ones you might know, like as Miracle-Gro. You mix it with water, turns the water green or blue or pink, depending on the kind you get. It dissolves in water and it's immediately available for plant take-up. And this is great for your vegetable gardens, for your container plants, maybe some bedding plants that you have that aren't long-term plants in the landscape that just needs that quick dose of fertilizer. But for the majority of our trees, shrubs, and our lawn, we recommend that you use slow release fertilizers. These are synthetic or organic materials that gradually become available to the plant over time. So the nitrogen is gradually released to the plant. So it's not all in one dose, like with the quick release. It's kind of like dissolved over time. And these, again, can be natural, like compost. It can be, or blood meal, or it can be a synthetic source of nitrogen. Then there's also controlled release fertilizers. These are the ones that are in a capsule of some type, or it's coated with some type of material that helps with dissolving that nitrogen to the plant. So Osmocote is an example of something like that. But it's still considered slow release. So I really want you to understand the difference between water-soluble fertilizer, or quick release fertilizer, and slow release fertilizer. And we recommend slow release fertilizer to be used in all lawns and landscapes. And you can also use slow release in your vegetable garden and also in your container plants, but you can also use the water-soluble in those areas also. So let's look at some examples. And I'm not promoting one brand over the other. These are just great examples to show you some of the fertilizer labels. And here we have the Miracle-Gro. So this is a quick release nitrogen fertilizer. It is a 24-8-16 would be the analysis. So it's 24% nitrogen, 8% phosphorus and 16% potassium. If you look, you can also see it contains boron, it contains copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc. So it contains a lot of different micronutrients also. But if you look here on the bag, look closely below where it says grows bigger, it says feed every 7 to 14 days. And that's because this fertilizer is only available to the plants for up to 2 weeks, 7 to 14 days, depending how much irrigation that's applied, etc. So you want to apply this often because it's not a slow release fertilizer. And when you look at the derived from, we didn't talk about all the exact slow release fertilizers, but there's no slow release fertilizers that's labeled there. And it would say derived from slow release fertilizer if it was. But the key word on this package is water soluble. So let's look at some slow release fertilizers. So here's an organic slow release nitrogen fertilizer, plant tone, and it's a 533. Naturally organic fertilizers are lower in concentration than synthetic fertilizers. So that's something you just want to know. You might have to apply more of this because of the low analysis. But it says that it's 5% nitrogen. But if we look over at the derived from, it says in the second yellow circle, it says contains 3% slow release nitrogen. So that's what we're looking for. How much is slow release? We want preferably 30 to 50% of the nitrogen be slow release. And this is hard math to explain, but you have to remember that these percentages are the entire container of fertilizer. So 5% of that container is nitrogen, 3% of that container is slow release nitrogen. So you take 3 divided by 5, and that is over 50% slow release fertilizer. So it's not 3% of all the total nitrogen, it's 3% in that bag of the total nitrogen. I don't think I'm explaining this right to you, but you want to make sure that that slow release number is 50% of what the number is of the nitrogen. So again, 3 divided by 5, it's well over 50%. So that means that's a really good slow release fertilizer. It's going to last a long time in the landscape, and it's not going to leach or run off and cause pollution when applied appropriately. And I'm sorry, I have a hard time explaining fertilizer math sometimes, but here's another example. This is a synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. It's a 12-0-24. So this is typically a turf fertilizer. You have 0% phosphorus and you have a high potassium. This is, sometimes they use this as with the high potassium as a fall fertilizer, because potassium, again, is that multivitamin for the plants. So they put that down on the turf to get the turf through the winter, that multivitamin. So looking at here, we have 12% nitrogen. And if we read below, it says 8.7% slowly available nitrogen. So we take 8.7 divided by 12. And again, that is well over 50%. So that is great slow release nitrogen fertilizer. If that said only 1 or 2% slow release, it wouldn't have enough slow release to be actually considered a slow release fertilizer. So we want it, again, to be anywhere from 30 to 50+% of slow release nitrogen to be considered a slow release fertilizer to use on our lawns and landscapes. So here's another example. This is a 16-0-8. So 16% nitrogen, 0% phosphorus, and 8% potassium. The ratio would be 2:0:1. And this is not complete. It's an incomplete fertilizer because we don't have any phosphorus. And it's kind of hard to see here, but we have 16% nitrogen, and we go back, where does that nitrogen come from? Down on the bottom, 8% slowly available nitrogen. So we take 8 divided by the total nitrogen, 16, 50%. 50% of the total N. That's great. That's perfect slow release nitrogen. And it's coming from a polymer coated urea. There's also, so the other 50% is water soluble. So you will have some water soluble fertilizer always in your slow release fertilizer too. But again, a slow release fertilizer is define slow release when 30 to 50% of the nitrogen is slow release. This is a great fertilizer because it also contains sulfur, iron, and manganese. All the micronutrients are listed on that label there too. So I want to talk about some of the fertilizer laws and regulations. I want you to know that anybody that's applying fertilizer for hire here in Florida must have a Florida fertilizer license. So if you're hiring anybody to apply that fertilizer to your lawn, make sure that they have a license. So the license, to get the license, they have to go through 6 hours of training on how to apply fertilizer appropriately. So kind of what we're talking about today, but even more in depth on how to apply fertilizer. And they have to do that every 4 years, every 2 to 4 years in order to maintain that license. So you can always ask somebody if they have their fertilizer license. And it's not just the company has to have it, the actual applicator has to have that license. Also, make sure you understand your local ordinances. There are some municipalities that prohibit the use of fertilizers during the rainy season. For example, Martin County does not allow fertilizer to be applied to lawns and landscapes with that contain nitrogen or phosphorus from the months of June 1st through September 30th. The city of Stuart doesn't allow fertilizers with nitrogen or phosphorus to be applied from June 1st through November 30th. So you want to make sure you, wherever you live, you understand your local ordinances with applying fertilizer. Now, vegetable gardens are exempt. Container gardens are exempt from this. It's only your lawn and landscape where these ordinances pertain to. Make sure that you don't apply any phosphorus unless your soil shows that you need phosphorus. Remember, that is considered a pollutant. The middle number of the fertilizer bag should be anywhere 5 to 0, and 0 is great. Now, also, we want to make sure that we don't over apply nitrogen. Again, nitrogen can be a pollutant, and when it becomes a pollutant is either when we apply it at the wrong time or we apply it too much of the fertilizer. So if you have a slow release nitrogen source, remember that's 30 to 50% slow release nitrogen, you do not want to apply more than 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. If you have a quick release fertilizer, meaning that you have 30% or 29% or less of your nitrogen is a slow release form, that's considered a quick release nitrogen fertilizer, you only apply 0.5 pound per 1,000 square feet. Now, this is where it becomes tricky. It's not the entire pound of fertilizer, it's only of nitrogen. So we have to do some more math here. And I apologize for the math, but in short, if you just follow the directions on your fertilizer bag, you'll be applying the appropriate amount of fertilizer. So if they say use 5 pounds of our fertilizer per 1,000 square feet, put 5 pounds in and make sure that you measure out 1,000 square feet in your lawn and you apply it evenly throughout that area. But if your fertilizer bag doesn't show that, here's some quick math for you. For slow release fertilizer, just take 100, that's a constant, 100 for slow release, divided by the percentage of nitrogen, and that tells you how much total pounds of fertilizer you will use per 1,000 square foot. So for example, if we had this example has a 15-0-15 grade of fertilizer with the 15% nitrogen. We take 100, which is the constant, divided by 15, which is the percent nitrogen, and that equals 6.66 pounds of the total fertilizer that we're going to dump into our fertilizer spreader that we're going to apply over 1,000 square feet. So you might have to do some math. If you have 2,000 square foot area of lawn, you can take that times 2, and then you'll have to apply 13.3 pounds of fertilizers for 2,000 square feet. Now, if your fertilizer is a quick release fertilizer source, meaning again that it's less than 30% of a slow release nitrogen source, your constant would be 50 because you're only going to apply half the amount. So it'd be 50 divided by the percent nitrogen, and that's how many pounds of total fertilizer that you would apply per 1,000 square feet. Now, I know explaining this, I'm not the best at explaining this, but the links that we provide you today will give you more information on how to figure that out. So how much, what kind of fertilizer? Make sure that we apply it at the right rate. And we just talked about how much that we want to use. Again, here's another example. We want to make sure we read our analysis, know how much nitrogen that we have. Here we have 35% nitrogen, and it says that 15% is slowly available nitrogen. So 15 divided by 35, well, that's over 50%. So that's a good slow release fertilizer. And also measure your lawn so you know how much is 1,000 square feet, so you can apply it at the right rate. We want to make sure that we select fertilizers with slow release nitrogen, so we don't, so it's released to the plant over time. So slow release fertilizers can last many months in the landscape. And also, I don't recommend using weed and feed products. You've probably seen those. It has a little bit of herbicide in it to kill the weeds and a little bit of fertilizer in it. And sometimes they may even put in fire ant bait in there also. And the reason why we don't recommend them at the University of Florida is that when you actually apply them, you are going to get uniform coverage all over your yard. To get the best coverage, the best practice is to fertilize your lawn and do your weed control separately. So you know how much you're applying of each product evenly throughout your yard. And again, always read your fertilizer label. Make sure that you don't fertilize before a heavy rain. So if you read your fertilizer label, it's also going to say irrigate after application. Well, you only want to irrigate about 1/4 inch of water. And that's just to get those fertilizer pellets below the leaf surface onto the soil surface. We don't want to, oh, I don't know what happened. We don't want to fertilize before heavy rain because then it could leach down. All the fertilizer could go down into the soil or it could run off, causing pollution. So make sure you look at the weather. And then we don't want to fertilize within 10 feet of water. This is really important because we don't want the fertilizer to leach into the water or to run off into any bodies of water. So if you live near the water, fertilize 10 feet away from that. And we're going to talk more about that towards the end of this webinar, the webinar series. And if you have new turf or any new plantings, wait 30 to 60 days before you fertilize. Because when you first plant a plant, all you want it to do is grow roots. And fertilizers have a lot of nitrogen in it. And if you remember from the slide many minutes ago, the nitrogen causes plants to grow new leaves. And we want them to concentrate on growing roots. So we don't want to push them with added nitrogen to grow new leaves so they can take all their energy to push into growing new roots. So wait 30 to 60 days after any new planting before fertilizing. If you spill any fertilizer on your lawn, or especially if you spill it onto the driveway or the sidewalk, make sure that you sweep it up, because any impervious surface that the fertilizer falls on is just going to run off with the stormwater into the storm drain, which directly connects into our waterways. If you spill it on your lawn, you also want to try to sweep it up like the guy's doing in this photo, because it can burn your grass. Too much fertilizer in one area is going to kill that grass where you see that fertilizer spilled in that area there. So what happens when we do over fertilize? Again, it stimulates excessive growth, which might be great for some plants, but most of the plants in our landscape, we don't want to stimulate excessive growth, because if we stimulate excessive growth, then we're going to be mowing more often than not, and we're going to be pruning more often than we want to. So make sure that we apply fertilizer appropriately so we're not over pruning. And if your plants look the way you want them to look, if they're doing what you want them to do and they look nice and there's no nutrient deficiencies and they're growing how you want them to grow, you don't really have to apply any fertilizers. Not really, you don't have to apply any fertilizers, because they're obviously getting everything they need from the soil. If we over-fertilizer, that aggravates the pest problems. Over-fertilization causes weak growth of the plants, and weak growth is prone to insect damage and to diseases. So that's another reason why we don't want to over-fertilize. And we also don't want to over-fertilize, because again, that excess fertilizer is going to go into our storm drains and go into our local bodies of water. And over-fertilizer can also seep into our shallow aquifer that we have here in Florida. So we want to make sure we apply appropriately. Again, no more than 1 pound of fertilizer per 1,000 square feet when it's slow release, no more than 1/2 pound of fertilizer per per 1,000 square feet when it is a quick release fertilizer. And when you apply at that rate, the majority, 99% of that fertilizer is taken up by the grass or the plants. It's taken up by the plants and does not leach into our waterways. So we really want to make sure that we know our plants' needs. We want to have a reason to fertilize. Again, maybe we need increased growth, promote flowering, promote fruiting, or to correct a nutrient deficiency. Make sure that you get your soil tested. Again, we will do your soil pH test here at our office for free, but I recommend that you send up a sample to the university and they can test for the nutrients in the soil. Read and understand the fertilizer label. If you have any questions about the fertilizer label that you want to buy, you'll send me a picture of it and I can help you diagnose it and understand it and see if that's the right fertilizer for you. Follow the University of Florida recommendations when it comes to fertilizer. Our EDIS website has publications on all types of plants with fertilizer recommendations. So if you are growing St. Augustine grass, you can bring up the St. Augustine grass publication. It will tell you how often to fertilize your St. Augustine grass. Make sure that you abide by any of the fertilizer ordinances that we have locally, and use slow release nitrogen fertilizer on your turf and in your landscape, and make sure you apply it at the appropriate rate. With that, I'll take any questions that you have. I will email you a list of references on fertilizing appropriately. As always, the Martin County Master Gardeners are here to answer any questions that you may have. You can give them a call or email. And then there's the web address for EDIS, which is our electronic database information source, where you can go on there, type in St. Augustine grass, and our publication on St. Augustine grass will pop up. Next week, we're going to talk about mulching our landscape and also attracting wildlife, which is principle number 4 and principle number 5 in the Florida Friendly Landscaping series. With that, I don't see any questions. Does anybody have any questions about fertilizers? If not, I thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see everybody next week when we talk about mulch and wildlife. Thank you and have a wonderful day, and I will be sending you out an email later this afternoon.